Perfect. Hello, NCIA members and supporters, and welcome to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series. NCIA's Industry Essentials are our new weekly educational series featuring a variety of programs, allowing us to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, and I serve as the events manager here at NCIA. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity of introducing yet another fantastic educational opportunity for you all this morning. We will be conducting a moderated Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please don't hesitate to pose them by either using the Q&A feature available along the bottom toolbar, which will allow our panelists to answer questions in real time throughout the presentation, or by sending them as a message inside the chat room to all panelists or everyone in the meeting, and our team will compile them for discussion. I've had the pleasure of seeing many of these panelists present at our previous conferences, so I know you're all in store for a very informative and thought-provoking conversation surrounding how cannabis operators can mitigate the risk that the coronavirus presents to their customers, their employees, and their businesses. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Committee Insights, Managing Novel Risks During the COVID-19 Crisis, presented by NCIA's Risk Management Committee and being moderated by Jason Horst, Principal at Horst Legal Counsel. Take it away, Jason.
Hi, thanks so much, Brian. It's great to have you introduce us and give some real energy before the risk managers start talking. We are commonly known as the coolest people in the cannabis industry for a reason. And so I hope everybody's had their coffee and is ready for a fun talk. As Brian mentioned, my name is Jason Horst. I'm the principal of Horst Legal Counsel, a law firm serving the cannabis industry in areas including risk management and litigation. I'm the chair of this committee, the NCIA's Risk Management and Insurance Committee, and also a member of NCIA's Policy Council. And I also serve on the board of directors for the International Cannabis Bar Association. With me today is a terrific panel, including Stephanie Bizzuto, who's the co-founder and president of marketing at Cannabis Connect Insurance Services. Stephanie is an insurance professional with 14 years experience in business development, marketing strategy, and insurance coverage analysis. Stephanie, as I mentioned, is the co-founder of Cannabis Connect Insurance, which is a partner of Acrisure LLC. She's the vice chair of this committee and also serves as a member of the Insurance and Cultivation Committees for the California Cannabis Industry Association, is an executive board member of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, among a number of other distinguished positions. But you know, we've got to get to the presentation at some point. So. Jenna Kesey is a CPCU, is a senior underwriter at Cannabis Insurance Services, LLC. Jenna joined Cannabis in 2019 after a long and distinguished career in underwriting. Jenna is currently the president of the CPCU Society Cleveland chapter, where she advocates for educational and social involvement within the insurance industry and supporting businesses. Identifying and mitigating risk has been a specialty of hers from childhood, reading the fine print and informing others of the rules to follow. With us as well is Eric Ron. Eric is the managing partner, of S2S Insurance Specialists. Eric is an international insurance broker with a broad business experience in every level of business, from boardrooms of public and private corporations to family businesses to running startups. And in 2014, Eric formed S2S Insurance Specialists to focus on the emerging recreational and medical marijuana and hemp industries. Eric has been a leader on our committee and has served for 3 years with us and is a proud supporter of the NCIA PAC. Wes Gilbreth is also with us. Wes is the CFO and head of corporate development for Continental Heritage Insurance Company, which was one of the first admitted insurance companies to offer coverage in the cannabis industry. Wes has led the product development process for Continental's cannabis programs, including the development of rating and underwriting guidelines for some of its casualty programs. Wes serves as vice chair on the American Bar Association's Cannabis Law and Policy General Committee, and is a member of our committee and has led up one of our subcommittees as well. Finally, rounding up the group, and last but absolutely not least, is Eduardo Provencio, who's the General Counsel for Mary's Medicinals. Eduardo oversees all legal matters related to Mary's brands, including Mary's Medicinals, Mary's Nutritionals, Mary's Methods, and Mary's Tales, as well as handling all internal legal operations for Technology Holdings, LLC, and its affiliated companies. Eduardo sits on the company's executive leadership team, driving the growth and goals of its CPG operations. He is a frequent speaker on the cannabis and hemp-related circuit across the country, serves as a member of NCIA's Policy Council, and is a member of the Cannabis Advisory Board for Business Insurance Media. So really terrific panel to talk to you guys today. Diving into our substance, I want to start by addressing what role insurance coverage that businesses are already paying for may have in helping to navigate the problems that they're seeing during this crisis. Employees are getting sick, businesses are having to shift their operations in real time, and there are potential concerns about liability to those exposed to the virus on site. Let's start with workers' compensation. Stephanie, is the virus covered under workers' comp?
Great question, and thanks again for having me today. Really appreciate your guys' time. So this is the question that everyone is asking, and we all to this day, unfortunately, there's not a definitive answer. However, what we're noticing is each case of the coronavirus will have to be evaluated basically independently to determine whether it was contracted during the course of employment. And what we're hearing from other insurance carriers, such as Berkshire Hathaway, they actually had a quote. And it said on their quote, if an employment subjects a person to an increased risk compared to the general public, the injury is more likely compensable. So that's from Berkshire. We have another quote from Travelers Insurance, and what they said was, quote, we are encouraging our customers to report a claim if the employee is basically saying there's a workplace exposure to the virus. Each claim will be investigated upon its own merits to determine compensability. So really, again, we're focusing on a case-by-case basis, and especially with a pandemic like this, it's really difficult to determine where and when the virus was contracted. So again, it's a great question. We're all asking that every single day, and just keeping track with what's going on with the insurance industry, but that's where we're at. It's case by case.
And so, Eric, if we're going case by case, who's got the burden of proof to establish that someone contracted COVID-19 at the workplace or was exposed to coronavirus at the workplace? You're muted.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome. While workers' comp policies are meant to protect workers against illness and accidents occurred at work, the Department of Labor breaks COVID-19 workers' comp cases into two distinct categories. The first being high-risk employees, such as frontline medical staff that are dealing with the public and are really out there on the front lines. Second is what we'll consider administrator or low-risk occupants. If you feel you've been exposed to COVID-19 at your workplace, the burden of proof remains with the employee. There is no requirement to prove negligence against your employer, but you as the employee will be required to prove you contract COVID-19 within the last 30 days by providing medical evidence establishing a diagnosis of COVID-19 and filing a claim with your company's workers' compensation insurance company. So again, the burden of proof is on the employee, and you need to go get tested and get the results of that test.
And Stephanie, from a practical standpoint, if I'm a business owner and my employee comes to me and says, I have COVID-19, I want to file a workers' comp claim, what do I do now?
Right, so basically what you would do is you would give your employee a claim form. You would submit the claim to the insurance carrier. You would also ask that the claim be delayed and investigated. This will send it to an indemnity adjuster, not just a medical only desk. And the claims adjuster has 90 days from the employer's knowledge of an alleged claim to accept or deny the claim. The next thing you would do is you would follow up with the adjuster during the 90-day discovery period. You would stay in touch with your employee and also direct them to state disability. And another note, just really quick, my mention earlier from Berkshire and Travelers, those are just different companies that have different statements that have been circulated. I did know that there was on our Zoom chat, Berkshire is definitely a cannabis-friendly workers' compensation company. Travelers Insurance is not, but these are just really large insurance companies that had messages that went out to the general public. So it's really good to see what these really large insurance carriers are saying and seeing how that will make its way and manifest to the workers' comp insurance carriers that are friendly for cannabis.
Terrific. And Eric, assuming that somebody gets covered under a workers' comp claim, what benefits can they expect to receive?
Good question. So for high-risk workers, workers' comp will pay continuance pay up to 45 days. And for lower risk claims, for lower risk employees, the claims will pay 30 days of continuance pay, along with any medical expenses incurred.
Terrific. So want to move to a discussion of what at least the insurance nerd in me thinks is the most interesting of this subset of topics, which is the first party property coverage claims. Eric, assuming that a business feels like they have some sort of a loss that they believe should be compensable under insurance, what should companies be doing right now to determine whether those losses are covered?
So we understand that insurance may not always be on the top of your list of business items, but nonetheless, taking steps to minimize your risk now will protect you and your company down the road. It's important to note that insurance landscape for the cannabis industry is ever changing, and I highly suggest you read your insurance policies and do not leave it up to others. So at this point, take out your policies and have a look. First, on your property policies, if you've looked at purchasing business interruption, you need to read the policy language carefully. See, that is a covered event. If your policy has a loss use clause, you should investigate further with your broker to determine if you have a legitimate claim. But more importantly, you need to look specifically at the exclusion sections towards the back of the policy. Most property policies exclude coverage for infectious disease, virus, and pandemics. So again, although you may see language that supports your claim in one section of your policy, there may be an exclusion or endorsement in another part of your policy that changes that language. So again, I advise you to read your policies carefully. And if you don't understand it, call your broker. Call the person who sold you the policy and review it with them.
And Jenna, the 64,000 or really perhaps the $640 million question. If I submit a claim for property coverage, am I going to be covered?
That's a great question. The short answer is maybe, maybe not. Every policy that we issue is a little bit different, especially when it comes to coverage provided for the cannabis industry. I would never tell somebody to not submit a claim. If you review your portfolio, if you talk with your broker and you have a discussion, I always encourage you to follow kind of what Eric outlined and submit that claim. But as you talk with your broker, the biggest thing that you'll want to look for is if you have business interruption coverage on your policy or business income. If it's not there, there's not going to be any coverage for that kind of an exposure at all. On top of that, it's most likely there won't be any coverage because it's not a physical damage that occurred. So most coverage forms, if you're insurance minded, it's standard ISO. They're designed to be triggered based on physical damage. And that's whether you're trying to claim through civil authority or a business income, just direct physical loss. There are some proprietary forms out there that may or may not be quite as refined. But kind of what we're looking for with that direct physical loss is things like fire and lightning and wind and theft. And so far, like the presence of a virus on a surface would not necessarily cause physical damage to that surface. Right now, we don't have any current case law alluding to communicable diseases as covered. However, there are some instances of contamination, like ammonia release or soil saturated with gasoline, that have been considered physical damage. So if the courts come through and they determine that this is to be considered physical damage, kind of like what Eric mentioned, the next thing you're going to want to look for is a virus or a bacteria exclusion. It's pretty common that you're going to have a virus or a bacteria exclusion. After SARS broke out, it was an insurance services office's determination to put out these virus and bacteria exclusions so that carriers wouldn't be responsible for these types of pandemic claims moving forward. There are states looking to retroactively mandate coverage, whether or not it was expressly excluded in a policy. I've seen this in states like New York. New Jersey started with it and it didn't go anywhere. Ohio was on that list. It's very problematic when you have courts trying to put in this retroactive coverage. It would cause irreparable harm to contract law, and it would endanger many insurance providers' solvency and ability to pay legitimate claims. So all of your premium money that goes towards paying your fires and your lightning and your theft losses is going to be diverted to these funds where we did not originally anticipate paying these losses. Go ahead, sorry. As we go through this process of claims, we do encourage reasonable expectations. We know that everyone's just hopeful to get through all of this.
I was going to say, I wanted to just, put in the 2 cents that as an attorney who works primarily with policyholders when I'm doing coverage work, I don't care about any of that. And I would say you do want to, whatever the insurer's expectations may have been, you want to look state by state. This is going to be very different depending on what the law of your state is. California, for example, that there is case law that suggests that at least environmental contamination can constitute property damage under a policy. And because most cannabis policies are manuscripted, at least in the sense that they are not typically written on the standardized ISO forms that many insurance policies are, you're not necessarily going to have the same exclusions that typically exist in mainstream policies. That won't always be the case. Sometimes the virus and exclusions will be in there, but just to plug to reader policies, and especially if you're talking about a significant loss, do consult with your broker and potentially an attorney to see if there's an argument for coverage. And Jenna, one of the phenomena is obviously that on the positive side for the industry is that by and large we've been deemed essential through this crisis, with some notable exceptions. But if a business is in a state where they are deemed essential and can continue operating, what impact is that going to have on the availability of property coverage?
For this business income insurance, as an essential business, I imagine it will be a little less likely to receive that BI coverage, as this is based on a period of restoration following that concept of direct physical damage. So while operations continue, there's still revenue coming in, and we are still seeing continued sales growth with some of our clients. And insurance is designed to indemnify a named insured. It's to bring them back to the point where they were prior to a loss resulting from direct physical damage. And insurance is not designed to ensure that the named insured makes it to their originally estimated profit margins, unfortunately.
That makes sense. And the other thing that I wanted to put out there for folks to consider, if you do have one of these claims and you are working with your broker and your carrier, remember to distinguish the virus and the disease. So some policies definitely include very broad illness and disease exclusions that may not, however, apply to the physical presence of COVID-19, which is the virus as distinguished, or from coronavirus as distinguished from COVID-19, the disease. It's just an issue to flag. And so, Jenna, we've been talking about business interruption coverage under your property policy, but moving over to the third-party liability side, what is my potential exposure if someone is telling me, they contracted coronavirus and got COVID-19 while at my facility? And are any of the third-party liability policies that a cannabis operator may have going to respond to that type of a claim?
Well, I will say a wave of personal injury cases, we're expecting that a little bit. U.S. Chamber of Commerce has kind of put out that it would bankrupt businesses. We're recommending government protections to avoid straining the court systems with frivolous suits. But it's still going to be there. Someone's going to sue somebody for it. It's already out there. The problem is there's typically no coverage under the standard general liability policy. It's very similar to what we talked about with work comp earlier, where you're talking about that burden of proof. It's very difficult to prove where contraction occurred, especially in a situation like this where it's a global pandemic and it's very, very contagious. It's who did it? Where did it come from? Your store? Did it come from your neighbor? It's going to be really, really hard to prove that somebody, a third party, was sick at your facility. Additionally, if reasonable efforts and best practices are maintained and documented to prevent contraction to the best of your ability, it won't really be easy to argue negligence in that case either. On top of that, with the true insurance policy, you're going to be seeing a lot of communicable disease exclusions. That's still pretty common in that space.
Yeah, and it was, and I guess I'm curious. While the burden of proof is high, and I think it's right that few of these cases are going to actually prevail against the businesses, and I know that there are efforts, I think by the Trump administration to limit liability potentially, or at least there's mutterings about that, to limit liability of the businesses. If you get sued and have to defend one of these suits, it's expensive. Do you think that there is a likelihood that if there is, assume a policy without an illness or disease exclusion, is there anything else that would prevent the insurance company from tendering, from offering a defense to their insured?
Not necessarily, but with it being a frivolous suit, you'll find a lot of carriers that will try.
So Eric, what coverage might companies have for COVID-19 related losses under directors and officers liability policy?
Well, D&O policies are complex, multi-part policies, especially as it relates to COVID-19. So again, I stress you to open your policy and read the specific sections to evaluate your company's position. D&O policies in the cannabis industry, first are hard to come by and very expensive. So for the most part, you're going to really want to make sure that you read clauses A, B, and C, which deal with indemnification of liability for executives and their company actions. If you feel the company and or its officers and directors did not act in accordance with state regulations or compliance issues on a timely basis that caused harm to its employees, customers, shareholders, or the public, then contact your insurance broker to discuss a potential claim. If you think you have a claim, file it. There's going to be a multitude of D&O suits that are going to result as a result of COVID-19. Another important aspect to look at when reading your D&O policies is that a lot of D&O policies have a crisis management expense coverage, which may help curtail some of your public relations and media management costs in communicating how your company is dealing with COVID-19. So if you had to go out and invest in an outside consultant to assist you with your response, your public response to COVID-19, again, consult with your insurance broker. There may be a sublimit within your policy that covers your crisis management expenses.
Terrific. And can you speak a little bit to what EPLI coverage is? Sure. And what relevance it may have in this context as well?
So employment protection liability insurance, better known as EPLI, either can be purchased as a separate standalone policy or may be included in your directors and officers liability policy. It insures senior executives against lawsuits brought by an employee or a class of employees for violation of employees' privacy, willful misconduct, harassment, wrongful termination, wage and hour violations, violence in the workplace, just to name a few of the headings under EPLI. I like to call this policy bad boss policy, meaning your bosses behave badly. If you have a claim or you think you have a claim, contact your broker, discuss it with them. And I always encourage people, file the claim regardless, because there's going to be a lot of court action in regards to all these policies. And it may take years for it to sort out, but if you made a claim, you might end up getting something back over time. And again, EPLI covers your legal defense and other related costs in defending against an employee's brought in action against the company.
And thanks so much, Eric. And I wanted to just, before we move on from this section of the discussion, raise a question that was raised in the chat room. Is anyone on the line aware of any cannabis policy, property policy with business interruption coverage that does not have a virus exclusion? All right, there's your answer. All right,
it's going to be challenged.
The virus exclusion is going to be challenged.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, so I want to move into a discussion about what cannabis companies can do today to manage their COVID-19 related risks. Start with Jenna. What kind of measures should companies be taking to protect themselves and their clients at this moment?
Well, it's definitely important to follow those best practices. Every organization is going to look a little bit different, from supply chain to cultivation to retail. What you have to do to keep your people and the people you're working with safe is going to be a little bit different. There's a lot of good resources out there. I know the NCIA website has a lot of amazing information out there, and a lot of other professional organizations. We're all out there looking to help people. And if you talk to any of your brokers, I'm sure they'll have their ideas too. The big thing is to stay in touch with local regulations. I know I'm here in Ohio, and our governor has been pretty on point, keeping everything pretty readily available and well organized. And just stay in touch with your workforce. So the big rules of thumb, you want to keep your 6 feet distances, frequent sanitation, face mask, gloves, make sure that you're changing your gloves often. Otherwise, it's not worth it to wear gloves. If you can, order ahead for retail or do curbside or delivery or allowable. And the biggest thing is to just keep calm, because this too shall pass.
That's terrific. And, you know, wanted to do a quick lightning round, because obviously, you know, we're hearing all about SOPs and best practices that need to be implemented right now, but want to sort of go around the room, and if everyone could quick hit a single best practice, a single SOP that you would recommend that every cannabis business out there, you know, add to their plate. Start with Stephanie.
As far as the virus, I would say wash your hands and don't touch your face.
Wes?
So this isn't an SOP per se, but I would, from a finance perspective, I think the lesson learned here is maintain, or try to maintain, cash reserves of, you know, at least 3 to 4 months worth of OPEX. Can do a lot to stave off insolvency.
Jenna?
Well, kind of those original ones. Probably the most.
You already listed a few. All right, how about you, Eddie?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and this is something we did early on, but this is probably more forward-looking than current, is establish a response team. So we did that early on. We had a chief scientist, our chief compliance person, myself, our HR director, so we could put ideas and protocols in place once we knew eventually when we had to, you know, ultimately shut down because we knew it was coming. So we could move very, very quickly. So that's more hopefully not something we have to do come the fall, but that's something that we already have in place.
All right, Eric.
Less of an insurance issue, but more just more compassion for your employees, for your customers, and for your business. This will pass, but there's a lot of people out there hurting. They're not working, and it's up to us. Though we've been fortunate, our businesses have been able to stay open, is really help the other fellow.
Terrific. And I'll just say for mine, more than a specific SOP as well, but get specific when you're doing your SOPs. I see a lot of the word frequently, often. Those things can mean different things to different people, and ultimately your written SOPs are going to be a potential document that is exhibit A in any of these potential lawsuits that we're talking about. And so you need to be able to show that you've adhered to these and that you've put protocols in place that are reasonable. And so make them manageable, but make them specific. If you want people to take their gloves off every time they conduct a particular activity, you really do have to say that, because as Jenna mentioned, if people are wearing their gloves and just using them like your hands, they're not really having the benefit of the disposable gloves that you're using. So Eduardo, you started in on it a little bit when you did your SOP of choice, but can you talk to us a bit about how Mary's has changed its operations and sort of pivoted as a result of this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen two fundamental differences. We do a hemp-derived product line as well as a marijuana product line that we license into 11 different states. On the hemp side, sadly, we actually had to shut down our human hemp operation, permanently. So our human hemp operation, Mary's Nutritionals, is actually going away as a result of the aggravation from COVID. And again, it was one of those things where you had to cut losses early, knowing how long that this could go on. Obviously, without the cash reserves that Wes was talking about earlier, without those there, you really have to consider cutting losses early on. One of the things I will say is I'm sure on your news sources, you've seen a lot of companies, particularly hemp companies, pop up that all of a sudden began producing sanitizers and things like that. One of the things that we've seen here in Colorado is while hemp companies may in and of themselves not be considered essential services because they don't necessarily, they're not a dispensary, and they may not support supermarkets and things like that. If you support other essential service providers like emergency responders and things like that, then you are allowed to stay open. So we saw a lot of companies pivot early on and say, hey, we're going to produce sanitizer now, so they could stay open and at least try to keep their workforce going. That's something that we decided not to do. As far as the marijuana side, for us, it was, the point we made is we put a response team in place early on, in early March, for instance, and it was 6 or 7 key players, people that could bring their expertise. And to give you an idea about what we did, and this is beneficial, we met on March 11th and laid out a plan. And the only missing piece was, when are we going to implement this plan? If you guys remember, the evening of March 11th was when the NBA shut down. And at that point, we all knew this is moving very, very quickly. So March 12th, we actually rolled out our plan, which was, I think, a Thursday for implementation the following Monday. So we were about a week ahead of the city of Denver. And then 2 weeks ahead of the state as a whole when the state issued their stay-at-home order. So we had already implemented our remote work, our limited employee production. The good news is because we had implemented this early, we were able to get adequate supply for PPE, even alcohol and things like that in order to sanitize our facility. So. But it also provides an opportunity to tweak our systems. As the city and state rolled out their restrictions, we could modify our processes to make sure we are still compliant with local and state law. But as far as the things that we did, kind of the meats and bone of it, it was, if at all possible, trying to limit product product touching, essentially, for lack of a better term, by our production team. So if there's any way to have only one or two people handle product from building to packaging to fulfillment, and we're certainly going to try to do that. Sometimes it's not entirely practical for some products, but at least that gives us an opportunity to track, to mitigate concern, and then if something should arise, to be able to kind of trace back to see if there's something that we could account for. And then the only other thing is really enhancing sanitizing and cleansing measures. If you are running a GMP type compliant facility, you're probably doing a lot of this anyway, but it only really kind of highlighted the necessity for that, and is a little bit more vigilant, not only on the production piece of it, but also on the interaction between the production people and the other people that were actually in our building that weren't necessarily building the products.
And I imagine all of those people are staying at home right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, because we're a CPG company, it's easy for us to decide who actually has to be at the facility and who doesn't. About 30% of our workforce is actually production people. We need to be there. We also have salespeople on the marijuana side that are still making sales. It's how they're doing it. It's a little bit different. That's going to be very, very individualized, actually depending on what the states permit, and also what the what your clients actually comfortable with. So, but our finance team, our legal team, of course, our ops team, there are a few folks kind of that aren't building the product. They're there just to make sure they can resolve any issues. But it's pretty clear cut for us as to who needs to be in the facility. I mean, what it comes down to is we truly understand who is essential to our operation. It's clearly not the general counsel. It's clearly the people that are making the product.
You're essential in other ways. Don't worry.
I appreciate it.
And Wes, with so many cannabis employees working remotely, like Eddie is, like I am, and I think I see it. Other than you, I think we're all sitting in our houses.
I'm the only one here.
There you go. So what novel or enhanced risks does this create from a cyber liability perspective?
Yeah. Well, so let me first say that cyber exposure has been a growing source of business loss pre-COVID, and that's been true in the cannabis space as well. There were a number of dispensaries, for example, that were targeted with attacks in January and February of this year pre-COVID. So I think the business reaction to the pandemic simply accelerates those trends and accelerates those risks. Despite cannabis businesses being deemed essential in most states, I think we're looking at an increasingly distributed workforce that will create problems for many companies that are not prepared for remote access at the scale that it's currently required. It's not just the here and now of the lockdown as well. As many are speculating, future business models on both the employee and the customer side are likely to shift or evolve and involve increasingly higher volumes of virtual transactions. So, bottom line, I think the trends in cyber risk are clear. I think COVID is simply an accelerant. And in fact, when we do a retrospective on this in a few years, I think many will view the pandemic as a cybersecurity event. So it's important that cannabis businesses recognize that growing exposure. And lastly, I would say it's important that cannabis businesses recognize that they in fact have some particular vulnerabilities in this space as well. They collect sensitive health information about their customers. Medical dispensaries have customer identities, demographics, purchase histories, in some cases, medical conditions. There's, from an IT perspective, aggregation risk through track and trace technologies. A lot of the software vendors offering enterprise software solutions in the space are relatively new and almost definitionally not necessarily as involved or evolved as some companies that service other industries. And then lastly, one thing that I'd talk about or mention is I'm fairly certain that the FBI's cybercrime network is unavailable to cannabis companies. So What that means, unfortunately, is that hackers are aware of that and know that there's less of sort of that potential enforcement dynamic hanging over the industry. And again, unfortunately, it presents more vulnerability for these companies.
That's really interesting. And so Stephanie, as Wes mentioned, we've discussed here, while cannabis has been considered essential, a lot of companies are, in order to maintain more social distance and in order to cater to customers that are more reluctant to come into stores, quickly implementing delivery or even some shifting wholesale to a more delivery heavy model. What loss control processes can a dispensary owner execute in order to make this transition go smoothly?
So absolutely. So first off, knowing that implementing delivery is expensive as far as cost of the vehicles and insurance goes, it can really increase their loss exposure if not executed properly. So just a couple of things that are considered loss control and due diligence would be running motor vehicle reports prior to hiring these delivery drivers, checking for tickets and accidents. This would really drive up the insurance premiums as well as your risk of future claims, understanding what your driver's history and experience is. Also ensuring that somebody in the organization will manage the fleet. What this involves is managing all the vehicles, the drivers, ensuring the vehicles are regularly maintained and safe for the road. So just also implementing regular safety meetings to reduce claims, maintaining and this is always an interesting one, but maintaining a drug-free workplace for people that are working behind the wheel. So I know we're in the cannabis space, and a lot of us are consuming after work and everything of that sort, which is typically not a big deal. But when you're involving heavy machinery and behind the wheel, we really want to make sure that there's a drug-free workplace for those people working behind the wheel and driving on the road. During the COVID-19, we want to ensure that drivers are maintaining social distance when delivering cannabis. What this means is, to stay 6 feet apart, to wear a mask. They need to ensure when delivering COVID or no COVID, that they're in a well-lit area. You want to be in a well-lit area to reduce the risk of theft. No undesignated stops. We want to make sure that the vehicles are also at night parked in a gated, well-lit facility, and not letting the employees bring those vehicles home. Typically, that's something that we would prefer, that they would have them locked at a well-lit facility. Also, for dispensary owners right now, especially because they're trying to make this change really quickly, a lot of them are looking into having their employees drive their personal vehicles. So this would be considered a hired and non-owned auto insurance policy. They are available, however, they can be pretty pricey as far as the minimum premium goes. But another thing is, it's typically a secondary coverage, meaning the employee's personal auto would be considered primary, where the hired and non-owned would be secondary if the company was sued because of the loss. So these are just things to keep in mind when adding delivery to your dispensary. And also, again, it goes back to hired and non-owned. Typically, one of the requirements are they need to ensure that the delivery drivers have their personal auto policy in force at all times without any cancellation. So again, this goes back to your fleet manager and making sure that they're running those motor vehicle reports regularly. They're checking that they have their insurance, their personal auto insurance policy in place on a regular basis, and so forth. So it sounds like a really quick and easy thing to implement, and I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do. I am all for delivery. I'm just saying that it needs to be well implemented. It needs to be well thought out before you just quickly pull someone from pull a bud tender and say, okay, here, go ahead and deliver this in your vehicle, right? I mean, you just can't do that. It has to be well thought out, because there's a lot of risk when you're behind the wheel driving.
No, that's right. And for any non-insurance folks who are listening in, to decode a little bit the primary, secondary, what Stephanie's saying is your employee is going to have to resort to their own insurance policy before your coverage is going to pay out at all. And if that happens, you're going to have one pissed off employee on your hands. And so, Eric, in addition to operational aspects of pivoting to things like delivery, what other operational policies should businesses be focusing on right now to mitigate their risks? You're muted, man.
Jason, as I stated earlier, my recommendation is take out all your insurance policies and do a risk management review with your insurance broker. The cannabis companies may have gotten a boost when numerous states declared it essential business. That could remain open during the COVID-19 pandemic. But with that being said, many cannabis companies have had to pivot into changing their current business models. Consumption habits are changing how cannabis products are consumed. The highly publicized dangers associated with our last crisis, with the vaping crisis, coupled with current pandemic, both in terms of damage to COVID-19 causes to the lungs and the need for social distancing, buying patterns are shifting and demand from smokable products to more edible and tinctures. Edibles are particularly vulnerable to product liability claims for various reasons, so please check your product liability policies. As companies are looking to add commercial auto policies to address delivery services, you also need to investigate cargo content and fidelity crime. Meaning, commercial auto do not cover the inventory and cash in your vehicle, especially for cannabis companies. You're going to have to either buy additional coverage to cover your inventory and cash in the vehicle against theft and damage. As the pandemic continues, more employees are working from home. This leads to heightened risk for network security and data breaches. You, as an operator of a company, are legally liable for the protection of information about employees and customers. Please investigate cyber defense, as this is the best way to protect against unwanted cyber risk. And then lastly, the insurance is going to endure many years of legal challenge. And so, again, it's up to you to look at where are your risks, where have you pivoted your business, and we know that you're probably going to have to readjust maybe some of this year's sales figures. So you're going to want to get with your broker and report adjusted revenues. Maybe you can bring your premiums down. And also your retail operations may be changing in how you operate. So you're going to want to review your property policies as well. So with that being said, again, I can't encourage you enough. Pull out your policies, see what you got now, and then determine how you've pivoted your company and what changes you need to make to ensure and minimize your risk going forward. So you may end up changing some of your policies, canceling them, and rewriting new policies that cover your present risk.
Terrific. And I'm curious, Eduardo, in light of something that Eric mentioned about potential adjustment to your premiums. I got a call from my auto insurer saying they were going to refund 2 months of premiums. Is there anything that you at Mary's are doing and that other cannabis operators can do to ease the burden of insurance premiums or anything else during this time?
One of the first things we did is actually what Eric had mentioned is we called our broker right away in order to readjust our revenue goals so we can pull our premiums down. Obviously, we're trying to get our arms around as much cash right now as possible. So I mean that was the one big issue that we moved quickly on right away. The other issue too, and this is more the practical effect of having one of your product lines go away, is some of the big box retailers, for instance, require higher PL limits for products like the Walmarts is 20 million in the aggregate, for instance. And when we're looking to play in that space, we were paying those increased premiums. we've gone back and we've actually narrowly tailored those now to meet the needs of what our current clients, what type of requirements that they have. If it's something that we need to ramp up later, we can certainly do that. But again, it's just, it's a good way for us to try to get our arms around it right now and then reassess and do a little damage control.
Terrific. And so, Jenna, with a final question about what companies may be able to do to help themselves now, and also a shameless plug for a panel being put together and presented here on May 4th by our committee. Is there any relief for cannabis businesses right now under the CARES Act or any of the other federal relief programs that are helping some of these other businesses in other industries?
Well, unfortunately, not so much right now. The original CARE Act, it only works for organizations that are not federally illegal. So we were excluded from that original CARE Act. With the Safe Banking Act stalled, we do have hopes that when everything gets back to normal, it'll kind of get back in there. But without it being there, a lot of state bills even, so I know like California's out there, they had a nice one that they put out, but it's still backed by SBA loans, which exclude the same federally illegal organizations. It's pretty much ineligible to receive anything SBA financial assistance, including like that Paycheck Protection Program loans, economic injury disaster loans, traditional 70 loans, 504 loans, and even micro loans. But what we do have, Representative Earl Blumenauer out of Oregon and Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, they just introduced the Emergency Cannabis Small Business Health and Safety Act last week to the House of Representatives. This is essentially a cut through allowing banks to work with state-approved cannabis operators without fear of prosecution. And we're hopeful that this will be successful in at least starting the conversation or continuing that conversation for safe banking. For now, we encourage everyone, write letters to your governor, any of your lobbyist organizations, do everything you can to show the cannabis industry in the best light. Think of what our industry does to affect the community positively. At the very least, we're a source of revenue in tax and employment, especially when we're an essential business. And it was pretty tough for some of our states to consider this essential, so we don't want to lose that. Anything that we can do to kind of put forth the positive impacts that we have in our community. And on top of that, just keeping up with your best practices, showing those best practices and that you're a leader in the front line will really go a long way in helping us get some of these resources moving forward.
Terrific. And always be prepared for the unexpected cameo on your business meeting. Introduce everybody in my family. And so moving then, as you know, we got just a few minutes left here, to some of the lessons that can be learned out of this crisis and some of the things that cannabis companies and others can start doing to manage their risk proactively moving forward. One of the lessons out of the crisis that I think is a real teachable example from a proactive risk management perspective is the example of Wimbledon, which was very stable, looked at what risks might end the tournament forever, and as a result, ended up getting themselves an insurance policy, an event cancellation policy that included a provision providing coverage in the event of a pandemic. And so here you have a situation where you've got this once in a lifetime event that happens. We've spent a lot of time talking about how there's no coverage for it. Well, this event is everything for that business, and its cancellation could have really resulted in terrible things if they hadn't been paying $2 million a year for the last 17 years. But as a result, they're now going to get $141 million in coverage and be able to go on operating and hold the tournament again, hopefully next year. And I think it's not an example so much of something specific that you can do as a cannabis company, go out and immediately get pandemic coverage. That's going to be almost impossible right now. The lesson is really look at your business risks figure out what you can account for through solid operations, through what Wes is talking about managing your cash reserves, and what you really can't, and then cover that. Even if it's hard, figure out a way to do it, and that way, when this thing that is really unlikely but is foreseeable happens, you actually have coverage for it. You can actually manage your business through it. And Wes, you had mentioned, I'm sorry, is there anything that operators can do to protect themselves from a long-term perspective from the sorts of cyber risk that you were discussing?
Yeah, so I can make this quick because the NCIA is actually putting on another webinar today at 1 p.m. Mountain Time called Hacker Proof Your Remote Operations, where the CEO of a company called Geek Tech will be leading a more in-depth discussion of best practices. A lot of it's common sense, right? Being careful with confidential information, being wary of phishing emails, multi-factor identification, secure Wi-Fi, password protection, reminding employees generally to be careful with confidential information, not using business laptops for personal and vice versa. And then, of course, consider the acquisition, at least if you are directly interfacing with end users, consider the acquisition of a standalone cyber insurance coverage policy that provides both first and third party liability coverages. That would be my my advice on sort of the cyber realm.
Terrific. And Eric, last question here. Can you tell us about what the newly proposed Pandemic Risk Insurance Act is and why cannabis companies should keep an eye on it?
Sure. So what you're going to see post-pandemic is you're going to start seeing both state and federal legislation being introduced, what is known as the Pandemic Risk Insurance, which is a federally backed insurance backstop like TRIA, or better known as the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. The PRI would create a multi-billion-dollar business interruption fund to cover policyholders due to loss or disruption in operations attributed to the outbreak of a pandemic that leads to a federal emergency declaration. This program is in its early stages of development, and obviously we don't have enough data yet to support what premiums will look like. But what we're hoping for is in the future is every policy that's being sold, you'll have the option to pay an additional premium for pandemic risk insurance. So that's what we're looking for down the road. We hope if something like this gets passed, but again, we just don't know what the price or the timing of it is going to be.
Terrific. Well, that is our presentation for the day. I'll check in with the NCIA folks on the line about whether because I know there is another webinar coming up after us. Do we have time to address the Q&As in the queue, or should we wrap here?
Yeah, please do. We've still got another 2 hours in between this webinar and the next one. So if you all have the availability, nobody's dropped off in the last few minutes. So feel free to take a stab at them.
Well, we're long-winded, but not that long-winded. All right. So Kenneth, and I hope I pronounced the last name right, Michichi has asked, how might processing equipment and sanitation procedures help assure HACCP type compliance with potentially reducing insurance or recall premiums? Anyone want to take that one?
I can take that one.
All right, Jenna.
So anytime that you have a written procedure in place that kind of keeps your facility in top-notch condition, that can help you in an underwriting situation. So I'm an underwriter. I receive all your documents that you have, and I'm the one who kind of picks what your rate's going to be. So when it comes to any type of protocols, SOPs that you have in place that shows that you have a well-oiled machine, that you're doing everything to the best practices, you have it documented, you have your manuals, you've got your like your sheets where you're keeping track. The more documentation that you have and that you're willing to share with us shows how well of an organization that you run. And that can really put your organization into a nice picture to warrant some really, really nice premium credits.
Terrific. And Susie T. Roller asks, how about applying for unemployment insurance for cannabis employees? Anyone want to take that one?
So,
go for it, Eric.
Again, workers' comp or unemployment insurance is a state-regulated insurance. Most states, by example, here in the state of Florida, if you have more than 4 employees, you're required to have workers' comp insurance. So the best way to get coverage is call your cannabis insurance broker to find you a workers' comp policy that is accepted for cannabis employees.
Fantastic. Well, that rounds out the questions that were asked online here. Thank you guys all for participating. Thanks to all the panelists. You guys were terrific. And I will turn it over to the terrific team at NCIA. Thanks again, Al.
Oh, fantastic. Well, let's give a huge round of applause for all of our panelists virtually. Why don't everybody that's still in here say a big thank you in the chat room and let us all know what your favorite little piece of information that you got provided during this presentation was. It was a really great panel presentation, and we cannot thank all the members of this panel as well as our risk management committee in particular for presenting this really timely and relevant information to all of our members and supporters. All of you all that have attended today will receive a PDF version of this presentation immediately upon conclusion of the webinar. So please do utilize this contact information slide to reach out to any of the panelists directly if you have any additional questions, or if you all want to utilize any of their fantastic services to help you all with your all's needs as well during these trying times. We did want to conclude the webinar with just a few housekeeping notes and announcements regarding some of our upcoming events. So please stick around for the next minute or so. In case you all missed it, we have decided to postpone our upcoming 7th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo from June until late December. This decision was not made lightly. However, NCIA's primary goal throughout this crisis is protecting the health and safety of our community and the nation at large. Head to cannabisbusinesssummit.com to sign up to receive all the exciting news we'll be releasing in the coming weeks, including a very special keynote speaker we can't wait to tell you about, and some exciting developments for any product brand hoping to make a big splash on the expo floor this year. This will surely be a can't miss event and one we all desperately will need on the other end of this crisis. So as soon as you're able to commit to traveling to an in-person trade show later this year, sign up to ensure you are at the epicenter of the cannabis industry this fall. Additionally, we have also postponed our 10th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days until this fall as well. However, along with that postponement, we have also made a number of structural changes to the event, which will provide a more all-inclusive experience to the NCIA members volunteering their valuable time to our efforts. Admission, which is still just a nominal fee of $100, will now cover the cost for all attendees to participate in our welcome reception, breakfast training, and our brand new closing celebration in support of the NCIA PAC. We'll also be hosting the 2nd edition of our new VIP Day, which provides even more access and opportunities to participate in historic moments on Capitol Hill with fellow cannabis industry leaders and our congressional champions. We're hoping to bring together all those who've participated in the past, as well as hundreds of newcomers this year to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our organization and all the historic progress we've made together this past decade. Mark your calendars today, as the most impactful 2 days for cannabis industry advocacy will now be held from September 15th to the 17th, and you can register at thecannabisindustry.org/2020 lobby days. Have you or your business felt the pinch from a lack of exposure at in-person events these past few weeks? Well, you're not alone, and as always, NCIA is here to help. I'm super excited to announce that we just released a wealth of digital marketing sponsorship packages across all of our very highly trafficked platforms. You can head to our website to learn more and schedule a meeting with one of our biz dev team to discuss in more detail today. And last but not least, I would like to formally invite all of you to attend the next 2 editions of our new Industry Essentials educational webinar series taking place just this week. NCIA's Industry Essentials are our new educational series being hosted weekly, featuring a variety of programs allowing us to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when you need it the most. Next up this afternoon, we have the first edition of our Cannabis Summit Speaker Series, featuring panels and discussions that are highlighted at that Cannabis Business Summit and Expo I just mentioned a few slides ago. This session will feature Eric Schlichel of Geek Tech and Joey Ellison of Sophos Cybersecurity, presenting a session titled Hacker Proof Your Remote Operations. As with this session that we just hosted this morning, this webinar is free to attend. So if you're available this afternoon and you haven't already, please head over to NCIA's website to sign up before 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And finally, I'm very pleased to announce the launch of our new members only Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations Team series, taking place this Wednesday, April 29th, with a session entitled Staying Politically Engaged in the Age of Coronavirus, an update from Washington, D.C. These intimate discussions are an exclusive opportunity for NCIA members to hear from our government relations team and guests about the latest developments in federal policy. Wednesday's session will focus on providing NCIA members with ideas on how to effectively communicate while practicing social distancing and guide you how to navigate the political process during this difficult time. Finally, thank you all so much for participating in another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series. This content wouldn't be possible without the hard work and dedication of our panelists and our nearly 2,000 NCIA member businesses. So if you aren't already a member, please consider joining today. I hope to see you all again this afternoon and all of our NCIA members this Wednesday. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.